Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Benny L. Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Below the Line. It's a monthly conversation that I have with a distinguished leader, change agent, talk about technology, education, occasionally politics in a very safe way, and then we also talk about leadership. This month I'm honored to have with me a former South Carolina governor, global humanitarian, global leader, to talk with us. I'm very pleased and honored that Governor Beasley has joined us. Thank you so much for joining me and for taking the time to be a part of this conversation below the line.
Well, it's great to be with you. And below the line, I thought you might meant at the bottom of the barrel when you started talking about me, you know. It's great to be with you.
We're going to talk a little bit about what below the line actually means. And it's a negative, possibly connotation to leadership, but it's not, I don't want to get in front of that, but it's really talking about the things that you do that you don't know about.
Yeah,
How do you lead with things that you don't know about? And I can imagine over your career, and we'll get a chance to talk about that, that you had to really, not all the data was above the line, and you're making those decisions, and then you had to really think about what wasn't being said, what wasn't on the table.
I mean, great leaders.
Yeah.
It's all about getting the information and synthesizing it, analyzing it, and then executing a plan to resolve whatever the issue may be. And I tell you, all that's below the line.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just gathering the information you need with the teams you need, and that's leadership. And the world's suffering right now from not having that below the line leadership we need.
So getting to that point, it took some time, but you didn't start there. You started at a relatively young age. From my research and understanding, at a very early age, you want to pursue a career in politics, beginning with your time as a page in the U.S. Congress while you attended the Capitol Page School in Washington, D.C. So what drew you to politics in the first place?
You know, and I didn't know this till after I got elected in 1978 as a junior while I was at Clemson University and finished my degree here at Carolina. Mm-hmm. And but when I got elected, I found out that my great-great-grandfather was elected to the same House seat area 100 years to the day. I didn't even know that.
Wow.
And his father had been the sheriff of Darlington County, you know, sheriff back in the 1800s, like Wyatt Earp, you know, that kind of thing. And my dad served in the House, but I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And the first person I ever voted for in my life was myself.
Okay.
Because I'd registered to vote right before the election. I was campaigning for the South Carolina House at age 20. And during the campaign, I said, "Oh my gosh, I haven't even registered to vote." I had to go.
Are you serious?
Thank goodness we didn't have, social media back then. That'd eat me alive. And but I worked for Senator Thurman in the United States Senate. In 1975, my uncle was his executive assistant, and I was playing ball at Lamar High School, and my uncle said, "Come up and work with Senator Thurman." I said, "Well, I'm playing ball. I'm planning on playing ball in college." And but anyway, he talked me into it, and it was an amazing decision to be experiencing, politics at its core in Washington, D.C. And I guess that's where the bug may have bit me a little bit, but even when I was at Clemson, I was studying microbiology.
Yeah, I saw that. I read that.
Yeah, I was planning on being a doctor and or playing pro ball or going back to the family business. I wasn't good enough to play pro ball, but you know when you're 20 years old, you think you're invincible. You're illusionary.
Illusionary.
Maybe delusional might be better. And so I ended up running for the House when I was 20. Okay. And you can imagine the questions that I would get. "Aren't you too young?" Stuff like that. But what a time.
But when I read that, I was thinking that most people in college at that age are their aspirations to be the student body president. Your aspiration was bigger than that, and that's extremely amazing and impressive at that time.
Well, life's a journey, and I never was involved in the school politics, and which a lot of people were like, later they're surprised you weren't. I said no. I said I never was involved in school politics, and I encouraged. And after I got elected at age 21, I started encouraging young people all across the state to get involved. And in fact, when you go back and look at the late 70s, early 80s, the number of young people that then ran in the State House and the Senate, the numbers went up. And now, of course, they're retiring now as old guys, guys and gals.
So let's talk about that. You were the youngest Speaker pro tem and Majority Leader in the nation at the time. Was it challenging being the youngest?
Yeah, in some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't. But you can imagine in the ways that it was. Because one of the things that was challenging is that the older guard were like, oh, here comes this whippersnapper. What's he got to say? He's just going to stir things up. And so I was very strategic, making certain that when I did speak, I spoke with confidence and I spoke with knowledge, knowing the issue, because I knew that they would go take advantage of every opportunity to showcase this is a young kid, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So I just didn't go up there and blab on every issue. I picked my issue, and when I did speak, I knew the subject matter, could answer the questions. I remember it was the Gamecock newspaper, and I just gotten elected, and back then you had two or three of the old guard that kind of ran the House and the Senate. Senator Gressett, for example, and the newspaper had a picture of him and me facing off on the front page, which I thought was great. He thought like, well, I'm going to teach that little whippersnapper a lesson. And so my dad, I'm going to the House of Representatives for the first time, the first day. My dad had told me, he said, you get to know old Speaker Saul Blott. He's a legend. He's a historical figure, the most powerful man in the House, and he'll teach you the ropes. So I'm thinking, okay, Dad, I'll do that, because my dad had served in the House back in the late 50s, early 60s. And so I'm walking on at the Capitol, I'm walking up the steps, and I'm so excited. Here I am, now I just turned 21 before the election, and I'm walking to the outer doors open up for me. Hey, I'm a member of the House. I'm not a page. I'm younger than some of the pages. And so the outer chamber door opens, and I'm like, man, this I have arrived. And then the inner door chambers open up to the chamber of the House. Beautiful place. And guess who's standing right there? Is Speaker Saul Blott. And I'm thinking, I can't believe this. This is destiny by the Almighty. And so I go to shake Speaker Blott's hand, and he looks at me, and before I could shake his hand, he says, son, go get me a cup of coffee. He thought I was a page.
Right?
So I've got a decision to make. And the whole floor of the House is frozen, because every page there knows he doesn't realize that's that young House member from Darlington, South Carolina. And I got a decision made. One, I say, Mr. Speaker, you know who I am. I'm the future, that kind of thing. Or two, humble yourself, which is not natural for young cocky, athletes. And I said, black, sugar, cream, and he said black. And so I turned around. I don't know where the coffee machine is, right? It's the first time I've been on the floor. Yeah. And a couple of pages point their finger over to the corner, and I walk over to the corner, and everybody's just frozen still, just watching. So I go get the coffee, bring it back, hand it to him. Well, if you're a page, you hand it to him and go on. Well, I handed it to him and stood right there. This is happening in seconds. Yeah. And he looks at me like, why are you still standing there? I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm David Beasley. And he said, oh, son, I am so sorry. I thought you were a page. Well, because I humbled myself and served him, he took me under his wings, and it made all the difference in the world, because he did teach me the ropes. I did become the youngest majority leader, youngest Speaker pro tem, and on and on and on.
But that first impression really sets the stage for who you are, for your character and those types of things, and people will invest in that.
It's critical. Humility in serving others is the most powerful force on the planet.
And unfortunately, we've termed the term servant leadership, we've coined it almost like a cliche, but it's so real and so true. And you can serve at all levels and all different type of capacities from a leadership perspective.
It's very real. And I could tell you story after story from when I was in all these positions, whether it was governor or whatever the case may be, serving others, and I don't ask anybody to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself.
So in 1981 to 1992 legislative session, you switched parties from the Republican Party, from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Tell us about that and why.
Well, the Democrat Party had been moving so far to the left, and the Republican Party was moving from so far to the right to more toward the middle, and that's what that was all about. Honestly, and I'm close to many of my friends that are in both parties, Democrat and Republican Party, and today I'm really quite disappointed in both parties. Both parties have their good points, and both parties have got a lot of extremism controlling the dynamics of the left and the right, and that's really not good for America. We need more centrist American politics, and I'm very concerned about the
I'm
future.
glad you said that. A question that I had for you that I'd written down, but you opened the door for that, is what advice would you give to both parties today?
Shut out these extreme loud voices. I say shut out. Just don't cater to that. Don't cow to that. That's just a voice. Yeah. But America, the world needs that middle voice. You know, like I lean a little left, I lean a little right, and it just depends on the issue. And when I was in the House, I remember my best friends were my biggest enemies on the floor. We would fight it out, but it was never personal. It was always respectful. And nowadays, if I don't agree with you on the issue, you are my enemy. Yeah. And it's bitter, and that's wrong.
And I definitely think we're missing stability in the whole narrative.
It's completely wrong.
You should be able to disagree and still come together as friends, as community, as colleagues, whatever.
I had a friend this is in the U.S. Congress. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but he's a good guy, still in the U.S. House. Yeah. And there's a group of Democrats and Republicans that meet for a prayer breakfast every Thursday morning, about 30 of them. And they just pray together and, do a little Bible study kind of thing. And they're all good friends. And they were two co-chairs of that group. And this one particular conservative from the South went on the floor of the House and just ripped his friend that was in that group.
His prayer partner.
Yeah, his prayer partner. I mean, on the floor. And I heard about it, and one of the members of the House called me and said, "You need to go talk to so-and-so." And I said, "What happened?" And they told me, and I said, "All right." So I called him. I said, "Meet me at the House dining room at the Capitol, U.S. Capitol." And I called the other person. I said, "Meet me in the U.S." The person it was a female from California. And I said, I wish I could say the names, but I need to respect that. I said, "So-and-so, did you not rip your friend on the floor of the House that Jesus said, love your enemy?" "Yeah, but." I said, "There was no but in there." He said, "Well, yeah, but I said, "There was no but in there, and you were wrong, and you know you were wrong, and you go apologize right now." And he started tearing up his eyes. "I'm so sorry. I got so emotional." And they reconciled right there, and they were close friends. Yeah. But that was 15 years ago. Yeah. Now with social media, everybody's just attacking one another with no concern about trying to interpret things in the most positive light. It's translating everything in the most negative light, and that's just not good. I can disagree with you on the issue and still be your friend and still love you. And
unfortunately, I think the motivation for a lot of that has nothing to do with serving. It has to do with that moment of soundbite.
It is.
And it's going to catch up with us as a country, I believe. So that's unfortunate. So when you were governor, South Carolina experienced a record low unemployment. What were some of the keys to ensuring our state had a strong economy?
When I got elected, we had one of the highest unemployed rate in the country. And Governor Campbell before me had been laying the foundation for strong economic performance. And so we built on that. It wasn't just me. Yeah. Within about a year or two, we were like the number one best employment state in America, number one in job growth, number one in personal income growth, number one in international capital investments. So we laid a platform. We diversified the economy, and we were no longer just tourism and agricultural and military down in Charleston. Yeah. We diversified, so we became automotive, chemical. I can go on and on and on. And so how did that happen, though? It wasn't just cutting taxes. It was making certain that we had a pro-business environment, because we created the mantra for our state was you improve the quality of life by creating wealth through the private sector. So what can we in government do to empower the private sector to be able to grow the economy, provide jobs, and a better quality of life? And that means protecting your environment, because what CEOs and families want to come live in a place where the water and the streams and the air is polluted? So I'm like, we're going to protect it, but we're going to do it the right way.
Yeah.
Having infrastructure in place for roads and bridges and water and sewer and the right taxing structure and environmental regulations and labor laws. And then most importantly, having a qualified workforce. And that's where we were the best. And that's based upon providing superior education from higher education to technical education, vocational education. We zeroed in on that so that when BMW came, because they were like, okay, if we come, how do we know we're going to get, because we're not talking about 500 employees, we're talking about thousands. Can we get the experienced, quality workers that we need? And we have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that South Carolina responds and delivers.
And that's the same conversation we're having today. So I read an article this morning when I was trying to get up and have about 45 minutes of reading time, and it was in the Inside Higher Education, and it talked about the cynicism that the country has around education. Much more favorable towards technical education, less favorable towards higher education. So at USC Upstate, we're looking to see how do we leverage higher education to meet the workforce need. Talk to us a little about education and the economy and where you see higher education going.
We wouldn't have built South Carolina's economy without education being front and center, from primary, secondary to higher education. And I remember having some hard conversations. I mean, education, like any discipline, is always going to be a matter of evolution. There's always going to be changes, and that's just the way life is. And if you got to be prepared to adjust according to what the future needs are. And I remember here at the University of South Carolina back in 1980s, when I was chairman of the education committee, I had some extreme controversial discussions because we were putting out nothing wrong with having psychologists and psychiatrists. You want that. But I needed engineers.
Right.
And engineers could walk out of school back then and you would have a guaranteed job at $75,000. That was 30 years ago. And psychiatrists and psychologists were having trouble getting jobs. And I'm like, look, I'm not opposed to psychiatrists and psychologists, but we need to grow this economy, and I got to have engineers. So we're going to build up the engineering program. And so those types of honest conversations must be had.
Yes.
And then, of course, making certain that primary and secondary education, back to the basics of education, making certain we're teaching the kids the fundamentals of the building blocks for preparing the type workforce that we need. Where do we want our economy to go? Which direction? And you can't fool yourself. I mean, we're not going to be the Silicon Valley, so we don't need to focus on being the Silicon Valley. Not that we can't have AI and technology and that field, but when you look at where we are now, I mean, from pharmaceutical to plastics to chemical to automotive to steel, wow.
Yeah. Well, manufacturers big, particularly in the Upstate.
Yeah, particularly in the Upstate.
And so we'll look at diversifying our economy with other life sciences and those types of things as well. One of the things that we decided to do at the University of South Carolina Upstate was to start an engineering program. So we'll have our first engineering program that will come out next year. It's
Fantastic.
Engineering. And it's been too long because there's really no new conversation. The same things that you were advocating for then are the same things that we need
Fantastic.
today. So you've talked a lot about your Christ-centered belief in conservatism. I'm a person of faith. I grew up in the church. I'm a Christian. So how does your faith inform your work?
It's the fundamental basis of everything I do. It goes back to the greatest teaching in the history of the world. We call it the Mount Everest of all Scripture and ancient scriptures of all the different religions. That is, love your neighbor as yourself. And actually, the ancient translation of that, if you go back and watch my Nobel Peace Prize speech, I talk about this. The more accurate translation of love your neighbor as yourself is love your neighbor as your equal. Because you're all made in the image of God. You're all special, but you're all equal. If you want to end discrimination, racism, sexism, see everybody as equal, created in the image of God. And so love your neighbor as your equal. And I remember I was doing a television show with 60 Minutes, Scott Pelley, and it was a brutal, brutal interview we were doing on the atrocities inside Yemen. And at the end of the interview, Scott was so moved, and he says, you know, you've got the greatest job on the planet. You're saving the lives of millions of people every day. I said, Scott, I do. I really do. But I'm going to say something to you that you haven't thought of, and it's going to bother you. He looked at me like, what could that be? And I said, I don't go to bed at night thinking about the children we saved. I go to bed at night brokenhearted over the children we couldn't save. And when we don't have enough money, we have to choose which children eat and don't eat, which children live, which children die. And he was just stunned. Yeah. And he looked at me and says, well, I never thought about that. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God. And I said, well, unfortunately, we have to think about it every day. He said, well, I thought you had the greatest job on the planet. Now I'm like, how do you stay positive? How do you not get so depressed? And I said, Scott, well, now I'm out there in a war zone. It might be Syria. It could be Ukraine. It could be Sudan. And I see those little 4, 5, 6-year-old little girls and boys come from behind that war-rubbled building. I said, that's my little sister. That's my little brother. And I said, that's the image of God, and I'm not giving up on them. That's what drives me.
I never thought about it that way until I was reading about the work you did, particularly with Ukraine and Russia, and making sure that the grain that was feeding so much of the world population. Talk about that experience.
Well, you know, hunger was not the biggest issue among the leaders of the world until we made it. So when I took this job in 2017, reluctantly, I actually did not want the job.
And that's the job as the executive director for the World Food Program.
That's right, world's largest humanitarian operation. And so when I took the job, there were 80 million people, as we would say, marching to starvation. Hunger rate was much higher, but those who didn't know where the next meal was coming from, those are the ones that either starve to death, die, cause political destabilization, or migrate. Those 80 million. So I'm thinking, I can put the World Food Program out of business. We don't have time to get into why I took the job, but I got talked into it by a group of Democrat and Republican senators in Washington. And he said, you're the only one that can talk Trump into not vetoing that budget. And I said, well, I don't want the job. Let me just talk him out of vetoing the money. And they, no, you got to do it. Well, anyway, I did. So we were at 80 million. I thought, I can put the World Food Program out of business. I'm a former United States governor. We set goals, objectives. We have a vision. We execute a plan with benchmarks. We can do it. Well, the numbers got worse. And by the time I finished, we were feeding, on average daily basis, 160 million people on any given day, week, or month. I raised $55 billion in those 6 years, $39.2 million a day the last year. And it took every bit of life experience and energy that I had, 7 days a week, nonstop, going at it, because lives were at stake, nations were at stake, the whole planet was on fire because of climate impact, war and conflict, and the list goes on, the number of people starving to death. Hunger is the number one issue. And you look at the next 200 years, it's going to be about climate, conflict, hunger, and health care. Those are going to be your big issues the next 100, 200 years.
And I think here, particularly in our country, it's really easy to forget the impact of decisions that are being made, whether it's war, whether it's climate. People are starving. Real lives are being impacted who are not a part of the narrative or the conversation, or who don't even benefit from some of those things.
You know, when you think about it, I talked to a lot of universities across the country. I just did a series at Harvard and Princeton and University of Utah State, and on and on. And I tell the young people, I said, because there are a lot of young people out there that just want to tear things down. And I'm like, look, whoa. I've earned the right to be heard. Nobody's raised more money to help poor people than I have. If you have, let me hear it. But 200 years ago, the Earth's population was 1.1 billion. 90 to 95% of the people were in extreme poverty. Think about that. Think about 90%, 95% of everybody on the planet struggling to get something to eat. Today, less than 10%. So we have built systems, institutions, structures in place of sharing more wealth than any time period in world history. But try telling that to the 10% we haven't reached. The answer is not just stay in the course. The answer is, what are we going to do without tearing the systems down that's reaching the 90, but what are we going to do to reach that 10%? And we can do that. We've got the experience, we've got the know-how, we've got the technology to do it. We got to focus and get it done, because those 10% are struggling out there in real serious ways.
And actually, the paradigm that you just presented is really one that I talk about around leadership. Oftentimes, it can be an A and D. It's not about a win-win or an either-or. It's about an and. We can protect the 90%, and we can.
That's right. It's
address
critical.
the 10%.
It's critical to understand that. It really is. If a program's not working, then just clean it up.
Yeah.
When you see some of these wealthy people, you might remember when, whether I was dealing with the Black Sea Grain Initiative in Russia and Ukraine, or whether I was tweeting with Elon Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg about, look, guys, during COVID, the increase in wealth to the billionaires was $5.2 billion every day. Yeah. And I said, all I need is one day's worth of your net worth increase. You have a moral obligation with the wealth you have earned and fought for and worked for. I'm not opposed to you making money. You have a moral obligation, though, to give back to the poor and help the needy in times like this. Otherwise, the system will collapse.
Yeah. So, and that speaks to the Nobel Peace Prize that you received on behalf of the World Food Program in 2020. And that was an amazing honor. So tell me about that experience.
What people haven't heard was a year before that, we had gotten rumors that we might get it, that I might get that phone call. So we got all prepared, and I had my suit and, had a speech ready and didn't get the phone call. Oh. And so I told my team, Benny, I said, don't ever bring this up to me again. Never. We do what we do. We serve the poor. We help those that are hungry. And if it happens, by God's will, it happens. But let's just stay focused. So the day that it happened, I was literally in Niger, and I was out in the field. I had an area where moving supply chain was being disrupted because of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We had ISIS elements to about 10, 15 miles to the south of us, and we had Al-Qaeda elements 10, 20 miles to the north of us. So these extremist groups, they shut down supply chains so people can't get food or medicine. And then they recruit with food and medicine. And I've had more women, mothers, say my husband or my child didn't want to join ISIS, Mr. Beasley, but we hadn't fed our little girl in 2 weeks. What were we supposed to do? It's not like they can jump in a car from Spartanburg and drive to, Walnut Grove or Greenville, that kind of thing. And so I was in there negotiating, and I had come back to the capital city, Niamey, that morning, meeting with the president and the military general, who just said, we can't take the risk of you getting hurt. And I'm like, you understand 80% of our operations are in war zones. We know how to do this. And if we don't, ISIS and Al-Qaeda will grow, and then they will destroy your country. And so my phone was upside down on the coffee table. And it was just burning up. And I'm like, what in the world's going on? And anyway, about that time, and I'm pounding the table with the general. I got to have access, this kind of thing. And next thing you know, the door bust open. And one of my guys busted the door open, and I look at him like, what the heck are you doing? Because I'm having a fierce conversation. He looks and says, Nobel Peace Prize. I said, oh, yeah, who won it? And he said, you did. We did. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. And so obviously I got what I wanted that day from the general to the president.
Congratulations. That's a late congratulations, but definitely and well honored. You also received another award for courage, the J.F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award from U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy. But what led up to that was the courage that it took in 1996 to support the move of the Confederate flag from atop the state capitol here in South Carolina. Talk about that experience.
Ooh, doggy. People can't appreciate today what that was like. There was.
I think I can. I got a feeling that I followed it for a minute.
Everybody in my team was saying, Governor, wait till after the election. Wait till after the election, because your numbers are great. You'll be reelected. You can do this after the election. But, I got my mama's blood in me. And my mama was always like, you take the fight whenever it needs to be taken, And so I made the decision before the election to do that. And I remember George Bush calling me, Governor Bush from Texas, who became president. It's like, Beasley, I'm proud of you. And Hillary Clinton actually called me, two national figures, and what we can do to help, yada, yada. Well, anyway, a lot of the people underestimated how visceral and how volatile that issue really was. We actually had to take the children, send them out of state for a couple of weeks. We had that many death threats. But now people look back and say it was the right thing to do, and it was. Yeah. But it was it was the right decision, and we failed in that effort. But somebody had to pierce the boil, so to speak, and so that someone could come in later and then do it. And I wouldn't change anything we did on that. Now, the night of my election loss, I brought my team in together because the national media was shocked. I was chairman of the Republican governors. There were 32 out of 50. I was going to be the next National Governors Association, yada, yada. And so I brought my team in, and I said, I got 3 questions I want to ask. I said, number one, did we do what was right? And I said, did we? And everybody said, yes. Did we do what was right when it was right to do it? Because a lot of people do what's right when it won't cost them anything. I mean, you ever go to a church when the biggest donor in the church has a divorce, the preacher won't talk about divorce probably for a year or two. I'm kind of joking around.
No, you're not joking, but it's true.
But a politician, most politicians won't stand for an issue that will cost them an election. They'll wait till it's convenient. I said, so number one, did we do what was right? They said yes. Number two, did we do what was right when it was right to do it? And they all said reluctantly, yes. And I said, all right, when we did what was right at the right time, did we do it the right way? We didn't do it out of judgment, condemnation, division, and bitterness. We did it out of love, compassion. I said, if you answer yes to all 3, well, we've been successful. And they loved it for about a minute and realizing they got to go look for a job.
Well, I read that several articles that was written around that situation. I really admire that decision to do that, because there's really not always a good time to do the right thing.
Well, here's what was interesting, because I grew up in a predominantly black community. I grew up with more blacks at my dinner table than whites. We went through the Civil Rights Movement, one of the first forced racially integrated schools in the South of the United States, where they turned over school buses. And I went from a 99% white school, public school, to a 99% black school after the integration when the whites left. And so all the athletes, the black athletes, would come down to my house because we were across the cotton field, literally, from the school. And so they would come down to my home, and we grew up together. And I mean, it was a blessing to me. We were equal. We were the same. And so growing up and seeing the sufferings and the struggles and the past and the history and when I was governor, I found that because of that flag, because it was flying on the Capitol, had no sovereignty to it, I had a lot of messages that was not being heard, particularly in the black community, because of that flag. And I said, this is not right. And, there was no compelling reason to fly it. And so I made that decision and said, it's time to do it. And if it causes me my election, that's fine. I'm okay with that,
And it was unfortunate. I think it was put there in 1962, and not so much as the heritage of the Confederacy, but during a very tumultuous time in the country around race.
That's right.
So I think it was a great decision. It was the right thing to do. I don't think enough politicians make difficult decisions, because there are real impact to those decisions from a personal perspective. And to see what has happened, how you've led since then, is much more of a global impact on this country, on this world, to really change the lives for so many others. So I think God protects his own.
Indeed. No doubt about it. And I'm so grateful. I wouldn't change a thing.
So how would you describe yourself as a leader, and how would others describe you?
Boy, you have to ask others about that. It's probably mixed, but I like, confident vision. I like to build teams, address the major issues that need to be addressed, put together teams for that, inspire and empower and encourage them, and let them go. The world right now is lacking the leadership we need to solve the big problems. One of the biggest things as a leader is to focus on things that matter. You can't do everything. And this is one of the things I've been hard on some of our leaders in the world right now. It's like the iceberg in front of the Titanic. State Department is focusing on the broken wine glass in the ballroom and the broken cracked tile in the toilet, in the bathroom. And I'm like, well, those things aren't good, but you got an iceberg out front. When you have icebergs out front, focus on the icebergs. Yeah. So what are the big things you must focus on? And don't get distracted with the little things. A leader cannot afford to do that. And unfortunately, our leaders today, you go talk to a U.S. senator, a U.S. House member, go look at their schedule. Every meeting they have is a good meeting, but 75% of those meetings are not involving solving big problems.
Those are big
and
rocks,
right now in the world, we've got big problems, and all of them are solvable. Yeah. And I tell them, slow down. I was speaking to the G7 and the G20 a couple years ago in private, and I said, let me just get to the point. The world's falling apart, and you're all running around playing that little children's game, whack-a-mole. It pops up, and you touch it, and you go to the next one. You touch it, and you go to the next one. And none of you are slowing down to solve one of them. Won't we all slow down? Let's just solve Yemen together. Let's solve Syria together. Let's solve Iran. If you'll solve one, a few months later, you solve another one. You can't tell me with the influence, the power in this room, we can't solve these problems, but no one is focusing. Yeah. And that's our biggest problem right now. Leadership requires vision and execution, and it means you've got to be focused and dedicated to solving these issues and seeing it through versus the tweet of the moment and the social media. It used to be you had news cycles every couple of weeks. Now news cycles like every 20 minutes. It's insane. Constant. Absolutely is insane.
So let's talk about what this this whole series is about, leading below the line. And so when I think about that term, and it wasn't me who coined the term. I heard this term in a conflict management context about resolving conflict and find out what's below the line. So when you think about leadership and the decisions that you make on a daily basis, or those big decisions that come to you, big issues, oftentimes we don't know what's going on below the line. We may know what people tell us, we may know what the data says, but there are some really personal issues or personal things that's going on. How do you lead in that capacity?
That's very, very important. And that means surrounding yourself with quality people, diverse people. And that's one of the things I did at the World Food Program, putting together competent people. You can't just put people in place that just looks good. They've got to be given the authority. They got to have the respect. And you want somebody, and I used to have this in my meetings, I demand that you tell me what you're thinking. When I make the decision, we're all together. But I want it to be a very robust discussion. I need to hear other opinions. And if I hear that you are disagreeing with me and downing what decision I made without bringing that up in the discussion, I'm going to fire you. Bring it up. If I find out you didn't tell me what you were thinking, I'm going to fire you. So bring it up, and I'll protect you. And that's what it took. And I made better decisions because I had my team gave me good advice. And they would tell me things that I didn't want to hear from time to time. And I would think about that, and I'm like, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. You're right. Or no, let me tell you why I think you're wrong. Let's talk about it. And then we would make a decision. Then we would all unify and move.
So if I were to summarize that, you're giving people permission, your team members permission to tell you what's before the line by empowering them.
It's
from
critical.
Their perspective.
It's critical. And actually, in my discussions, whether it was the World Food Program feeding 160 million destabilizing nations around the world, I would actually say things in my private meetings with my leadership teams that I didn't necessarily believe in, but I would provoke discussion. I wanted to provoke reactions and see what would come about, and it would be amazing. And then I say, you know, I really don't think that, and they're like, we didn't think so, but you definitely got us.
In case you did,
but got us off your seats, And I remember this one woman from Switzerland, and she was Norwegian, but she ended up living in Switzerland, and she was one of my senior directors. The first 6 months, and I didn't hire her; she was already there. She hated me. She didn't like me, and but after about a year, she and I became best friends. But I was always pushing her buttons a little bit, and I challenged her, and she challenged me, and we had a remarkable friendship. But the best friends I had on the floor of the House of Representatives were my biggest enemies. We respected each other, we listened to one another, and we would fight it out, and we would find compromises along the way. Iron sharpens iron.
So I have one other question. If I ask a whole bunch of people who are their heroes, many of them will probably say you. I think, and I will see why. Who is your hero?
Not one hero. I probably have 3 or 4. From my mother, who was always fighting for the poor and the needy, and she was a teacher and a social service worker. My mom, for sure.
Okay. And what was your mom's name?
Her name was Jacqueline Adele.
Jacqueline Adele.
Ooh, she was tough. I'm telling you
She was a Jacqueline, right?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, whenever any student or teacher had a problem, they'd come see Jacqueline. Because the principal, it didn't matter. She would speak her piece. That was Mama. Okay. And I got incredible stories with her. She passed a long time ago. But second was a guy named Man Stanley. He was a black civil rights leader in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, and he helped mentor me in Darlington, South Carolina. I loved him to death. Mother Teresa would be one, obviously, and I would quote her in my Nobel Peace Prize speech. But fourth, and for sure not least, is Jesus of Nazareth. Now, whether you see Jesus as a man, just a man, or just a prophet, like Muslims do, or a savior, if you will study Jesus' lifestyle, it's absolutely remarkable. The greatest leader that has ever lived on the face of the planet. He didn't run for political office. He didn't propose changing laws. What he was about was changing hearts. Yeah. And so he led with this. He was the perfect model of how to love one another. I've never seen anyone so selfless and so caring for the poor and so loved. Yeah. And I tell, it doesn't matter what religion you're from, because Jesus never asked anyone to change religions. He said, change your heart. Love one another. Yeah. Forgive one another. And that's what we need today in the world. Not more religion, but more spirituality of loving our neighbor, forgiving one another. And Jesus of Nazareth, go study his lifestyle. You'll be shocked, and it will change your life.
You know, I'm not going to ask another question because I want to end on that right there. Thank you so much, Governor Beasley, for being here with me and for having such an open, frank conversation.
Well, below the line.
Thank you.
That's where it is. Thank you, sir.
Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.